what I am. Written by Night Breeze. Read by no one and nobody.
Chapter 3. Celestia rubbed her temples with her hooves, trying to relieve the headache that had built there. There was so much to do, and so little time to do it. Tomorrow, she had to meet with the Griffin ambassador, explain to the press why a spacecraft pulverized a residential area of Canterlot, and meet with the aliens that had caused the disaster in the first place. Today was no less busy. On top of everything else she had done today, she still had a mountain of paperwork to fill out, a couple of nobles to meet with, and, to top it all off, she still had to write letters to the families of the victims from the crashed ship. As much as she felt for them, and as much as she pained over the senseless loss of life, it was still something that she was extraordinarily reluctant to do. It wouldn't have been the first time she had drafted such a letter, and it wouldn't be the last. But even after 1,000+ years of practice, it was still a task that she felt completely inadequate at. She was just glad that Luna was back to lighten the load. With a sigh, she levitated her quill in front of her and put it back to the paper. Before she had finished the first word, though, there was a sharp rap at her office door.
"Come in,"
Celestia said, grateful for the momentary diversion. The door creaked open a little to allow the sergeant at her door to peek in.
"Your Highness, Miss Sparkle and her new friend are here to see you."
With a start, Celestia glanced up at her clock. She had completely forgotten that she had set up a meeting with the lost human today.
"Send them in,"
she said as she cast the translation spell on herself. The sergeant nodded as he opened the door wider to allow entrance. Without any fanfare, Alex walked in, the shoes that Rarity made for him clicking softly against the marble floor.
"Hello, son. You wanted to see?"
"Hello, Alex. Twilight, how was the first language lesson?"
Celestia asked, curiously.
"I actually want to talk to you about that later, Your Highness,"
Twilight piped up before Alex could answer.
"We should really deal with the matter at Hoof first, though."
Twilight looked a little worried about something, but Celestia let it slide for now.
"You are quite right, my faithful student,"
she said as she stood up from her desk.
"We have a demonstration for our friend, and only a half-hour before we can show it. If time has taught me anything, it is that Luna is always there waiting for us, wondering why we are so late."
Alex looked incredibly confused at this little speech, but did not say anything about it as he fell in line behind the Solar Princess.
"How do you think you will react?"
Twilight asked as she kept pace with her teacher.
"I imagine a similar reaction that the first Diamond Dog ambassador had when he saw this for the first time,"
Celestia said, her grin becoming more impish.
"If memory serves, he didn't actually believe me, and instead thought that my charge was some kind of glorious god, and I was taking credit for his work."
Celestia then leaned in and dropped her voice to a whisper.
"I only hope that Alex doesn't fall to his knees and start worshipping me like Boss Lucky did."
Twilight let out a small giggle.
"He didn't really do that, did he?"
Celestia's smile grew even more impish.
"The Diamond Dogs are a superstitious lot, and were even more so several centuries ago. Yes, he really did do that. It took me forever to get him to stop groveling."
Alex looked more and more confused with every passing moment, but he didn't comment on it. Celestia was sure that he was filing away everything that was said, until such a time that he could properly ask about what they were talking about. She was even more sure that the number of questions he was going to have was about to triple. The rest of the journey went by in relative silence, which, to be honest, was somewhat nice. Before her sister's return, before the rediscovery of the elements, Celestia had found herself growing increasingly bored. The endless line of nobles and dignitaries who would all lie through their teeth to curry favor, the dull parties where petty people would flaunt their wealth, the aching loneliness that could only be felt in an unfeeling crowd, it all weighed on her, far more than she would let show. It was ironic, then, that now that her wish had been granted, she desperately wished for those days back. The odd procession stopped at a rather small, unassuming door, which Celestia opened without ceremony. Beyond it was a large balcony, over which could be seen the city of Canterlot, the neighboring countryside, and beyond. True to Celestia's previous prediction, her sister had beaten them here.
I was starting to think I would have to send a search party,
Luna teased.
Oh, hush,
Celestia said as she joined her sister at the balcony. She then turned towards the wayward alien and straightened her posture significantly.
Now, Alex, what we are about to show you will fly in the face of most of what you believe to be true. Know that what you bear witness changes nothing about me and my sister. We are mortal, flesh and blood like you. We are not gods.
This seemed to confuse the human further.
Not think gods. Even if name translate moon goddess, sun goddess. Not think gods. Why say?
This caused Celestia to almost burst out laughing.
I'm sorry, I did not know that our titles translated that way to you,
she said as she brought herself under control.
I truly have no idea why this spell does some of the things it does. But our titles do not mean goddesses. Rather, they mean daughters of power.
The human's incredibly expressive face scrunched up at this.
Daughter of high being?
He muttered to himself. Before either princess could correct him, however, he suddenly looked up at them, understanding written on his face.
Princess?
Correct, though I'm sure your word is less accurate than ours,
Luna said with a smile. Alex gave the two alicorns a rueful smile.
No matter. Now no important thing. No won't think you gods. Not that superstitious.
The two sisters glanced at each other, then back at Alex.
Then stay, and witness as we lay to rest the day and bring forth the night,
Celestia said, almost as if part of a chant. The human looked at her oddly, but stayed silent, apparently waiting for the demonstration that had been so overly hyped, yet never completely explained. Luna looked at her sister, a question in her eye.
Do you really think a simple setting will be enough?
Celestia sighed a little, then shook her head.
I do not. If he has not noticed it yet, then it is probable that our sunset looks identical to the ones he has seen on his home planet. I believe we must do the dance in order to get him to understand.
The human put his hand under his chin, clearly trying to work out what the two were talking about. The purple pony next to him, though, looked like she was about to explode with excitement.
The solar requiem? I've only read about this. I've never thought I would actually get to see it.
The two sisters did not pay either of them any attention, though. They were too busy concentrating on maintaining harmony with each other.
I fear I may be a little rusty, dear sister,
Luna confided in Celestia.
Do not worry, Lulu. I haven't done this since you left either,
Celestia whispered back, as the two began to glow.
Hopefully, we'll catch each other when we fall.
Luna smiled gratefully, then closed her eyes as the energies of the moon flowed into her. It felt odd to do this again after so long, but at the same time, it felt so right. It almost felt like coming home.
His race does bow to others, just not all of his race. Based on this fact, the value he places on his own freedom, and the samples of his language that you collected, I would hazard a guess he comes from this nation here,
Kivalt said, highlighting the area in question on the hologram.
That is an incredibly broken-up country. Why hasn't this nation here,
Akitesh said, pointing out the area north of the mainland,
annexed this portion here?
She asked, pointing towards the huge area to the west.
There are several reasons. The two countries in question are allies for start, and are actually quite friendly with each other. On top of that, while this is still firmly a Type 4 civilization, they already have a few pieces of tech that belong to a Type 5 people. They've already split the atom.
Akitesh gave a low whistle.
They're nuclear capable already. I would think they would be wary of a power that can rot life away.
Kivalt winced a little.
They are, just not on the level that we would be.
Before Akitesh could ask her to elaborate, Lokar replaced the view of the planet with a model of a human, with the press of a button.
Their bodies and genetic structure are incredibly resilient. For all carbon-based life forms, ionizing radiation breaks down the genetic code, causing mutations and eventual death. They are no exceptions to this rule, but they are able to take on a ridiculous amount before suffering any side effects. And even then, it isn't always immediate.
Akitesh gave the xenobiologist a skeptical look.
That seems a little far-fetched for a people without a spiritual field on their planet.
Off the top of your head, do you know how many rats an unshielded Cusin can take before death?
Lokar asked, his tone similar to that of a serpent setting someone else up for something.
Easy. 200 rats. Though it can be more if treatment is quick.
They have people who have taken double that and have shown little or no symptoms for several days. They still show all the classic symptoms, but at a much slower rate. Not only that, but their mortality rate for radiation is much lower than ours. At about 35% without treatment for that level of exposure, rather than our comparatively pitiful 100%.
And you're sure that this planet doesn't have a spiritual field?
Akitesh asked, her tone clearly impressed.
We are certain, my priestess.
Kivalt said, changing the display back to the planet.
However, as interesting as this is, it is a little off-topic. The point is that they are wary of the effects of ionizing radiation, but not at the same level as most other races. According to their records, the mage who pioneered much of what they know about radiation and radioactive material used to carry radium on her body at all times. She still died from radiation poisoning, but it was a long time before she noticed any ill effects.
Akitesh closed her eyes, a pained expression on her face, then opened them again.
Okay, fine. Let's get back to trying not to bite our own tails. What can you tell me about his culture? What does he consider polite?
She asked, her eyebrows furrowing in concentration.
According to our studies, none of our customary motions, greetings, or anything of that sort would be considered impolite.
Kivalt continued.
They have taboos about wandering around naked. They consider certain words impolite in general conversation, though most ignore this taboo, and they seem to have a fondness for projectile weaponry.
Kivalt sighed, then rubbed her forehead as she tried to think of something else important to add.
To be honest, the country is kind of like a crucible. So many people have immigrated, or are still immigrating from all over the planet to live there, that trying to describe them is like trying to describe an entire ocean's worth of fish. A task that would take longer than we have time for.
Rather than put the priestess on edge, though, this seemed to relieve some of her stress.
That is good. If he is used to strange and fantastic cultures, then it should be easier to avoid offending,
she started to say, but stopped when her communicator buzzed to life.
Priestess, you're required on the bridge.
She heard Jadon's panicked voice over the device.
Stay here. We'll finish this when I get back,
Akitesh said as she closed her eyes. She then drew upon the artificial spiritual field of the ship, located her command chair, and willed herself there. She took a second to reorient herself, then snapped her eyes to the view screen in front of her.
What is... Jadon? What in the name of the divines is that? Captain,
Lieutenant Talion asked with terror in her voice.
Don't touch a thing, don't move a muscle,
Captain Hazalk said, his eyes wide and his antennae standing upright.
I don't know what the priestess is doing, but she wouldn't throw it at us. She'd be killing her own people and the people on the planet.
Sir, the moon is moving erratically as well. I don't know what is going on, but it almost looks like a dance of sorts.
Hazalk squinted at the monitor and noticed that while the two heavenly bodies were moving far faster than they should, it was still in a predictable pattern. Up here, down there, a figure eight there. To the Kryn ship and how close they were to the action, it didn't really look like much. Just a sun and moon doing circles and figure eights against the backdrop of eternity. But he was certain that, down on the planet, what was happening in the sky was the show of a lifetime. He was right. All across the land of Equestria and beyond, people of all shapes and sizes were staring up at the sky in wonder. Some were taking pictures, some rushed into their homes or places of business to tell those inside of the beauty that graced the skies above, while a select few started running around, screaming about how it was the end of the world and how they should all head for the bunkers that no one had. To the northeast, on a tiny island nation, the people of Minos looked up into the sky with fright, while far south, the Queen of the Changelings only felt envy at the immense power on display. Even further south than that, on the Zebrakin Mount of Eyes, the Seer of Time gazed up at the dance, her sightless eyes seeing far more than any of her attendants.
Get me a scribe. We need to send word to the sun and moon immediately,
she said, her voice distant. Far to the east, further than even the Isle of Minos, the Griffin Emperor sat on his balcony, gently swirling a glass of Chardonnay in his claw as he stared up at the spectacle in delight. Behind him, he could hear the worried murmurings of his council, but he paid them no mind. Even as they theorized and argued over what it could possibly mean, and whether or not discord was behind this, all the King of the Skies did was slowly bring his drink to his beak and sip with almost indecent casualness.
Your Eminence, what do we do?
One of the counselors asked him directly, bringing his attention to the worried counselor.
Is this not the work of discord? We need to prepare for when that demon comes to our lands.
The Emperor turned his gaze back to the skies above, looked down at his glass, then gave a contented sigh.
We do nothing,
he said, then downed the rest of his drink in one gulp.
But, sir, if...
It isn't discord,
the Emperor said, a note of finality in his voice.
Then what does it mean?
The counselor asked, his voice calming slightly, but his confusion only growing.
Only good things,
the Emperor said cryptically.
And all I have to say is that it's about time those two did something fun together.
This only raised his counsel's confusion, but he didn't care. They would learn of this dance's meaning soon enough. I stared at the sight before me, unable to move, unable to think. The sun was moving so fast that it left glowing streaks on my retina, while the moon was right behind it, its glow bright enough to be seen even in midday, following its partner's demented dance across the sky. They would loop around each other, often crossing paths to create a brief eclipse, only for the light to return seconds later. Slowly, my eyes panned downward, until they centered on the two sisters on the raised dais. Sun was glowing a bright gold, her eyes a brilliant white, as her mane rippled with power untold. Her sister Moon had a deep blue glow, while her eyes and mane seemed to look like nothing more than holes in the fabric of reality, through which I could see an eternity of stars and galaxies swirling in a never-ending void. Quickly, my eyes shot back up into the sky above, then back to the two princesses, then back again. Slowly, as the sun returned to its original position and sank below the horizon, one fact bubbled to the top of my incapacitated brain.
They can control the freaking sun and moon?
I stood there, just staring at the sky long after the night had come. Voices tried to get my attention, but I couldn't understand them. I felt a hoof gently touch my shoulder, but still I did not move. Something waved in front of my face, but I couldn't comprehend its meaning. Finally, with a strangled squeal, I slowly tilted sideways and collapsed.
Well, he took better than expected, thing being considered,
I heard someone say nearby as I tried to make sense of the world around me. I was failing, but if I could talk, I would have to agree with whomever said that. All things considered, flipping my lid would have been a completely appropriate response.